Success. It's always mattered to human beings, so we have devised umpteen cunning ways to measure personal achievement, and the opposite. The most obvious include wealth and strength, intelligence, influence and fame, things that help us to stand out from the crowd. Most of us are taught from our earliest days to aim for targets and notch up significant milestones so that everyone recognises our worth. But on the whole, these are worldly matters and not perhaps God's. When Giles Fraser, a senior and respected Anglican priest and writer, described Christianity as a religion for losers, some took offence, however insightful his comment. So many significant figures in the history of our faith look unsuccessful in the world's eyes. Take Moses. He may have been considered unequalled among those who first spoke out for God, but he still didn't make it, quite, into the land his people had been promised for generations. His hard work to create a distinctively God-shaped people remained incomplete. After 40 long years in the wilderness, it wouldn't even be his own sons who would carry on his groundbreaking project. I weren't much more than a clumsy kid when I first became gopher for old man Moses. He were getting on by the time we were camped in the Sinai wilderness. There were so many practical problems. At least I were young and fit. Who knew we'd end up having to fight other tribes for our home? Our folk were always up for a scrap though. They had diplomas in carping and criticising. Keeping them on side and up to speed on what they could or couldn't do as God's particular and distinctive people, that were a tall order by itself. So many unfortunate incidents, like that business over the golden idol. Blood was spilt more than once. Minute Moses turned his back, blimey, couldn't even rely on his own brother. With so many of us, there had to be rules. But Moses, he were the stopper in the bottle. All the law, its every detail was relayed through him alone. He'd head off to the tent set aside for meeting outside the camp to parley with the great I Am. I was just a security guard back then, keeping watch there round the clock. I suppose he found that helpful, and me trustworthy, as he leaned on me more as the years rolled by. Even sent me under cover with Caleb to spy out the land. Jethro, his wife's dad, advised him to delegate, appoint judges to settle domestic disputes. He'd never get through them otherwise. His two boys, well, they clearly didn't feel called to the family business. A shame, really, but I suppose their hearts were still in Midian. He cut a pretty lonely figure. Reckoned he spoke to God like a friend, but being the boss, that's hard. Isolating, and he was for decades. When he rode up, then his brother Aaron dies. Now his sons did follow him into the priesthood. I reckon the old man had realised he wasn't going to make the final furlong. He hinted that it was because he and Aaron had let God down too. Couldn't see that myself. Not with Moses. He was so focused, so dedicated, so devoted to the long game. But he were getting weary at the end, even though God showed him that view. Ha! This is what you could have won. Seemed unkind to me. When he said how I was to be the next leader, how the Almighty had told him, I was shocked. I remembered how Moses had brought our people out of Egypt, how after an unlikely upbringing he'd been a shepherd and a leader and a feeder, an initiator, a teacher. interceding even when we broke the rules. How could he have done more? Though he never wanted to blow his own trumpet. And I'd swum the River Jordan, but getting the tribes across it? Oh, better suited for knocking stuff down than building on his foundations. Those were big sandals to fill, I can tell you. But he wanted me to understand the whole epic business had never been about him. It were about forging a relationship between God and his own, not letting them make do with some worthless idols like other tribes or getting the wrong idea about what really mattered. He had succeeded, he said, in what God had asked of him. He were just a conduit. He'd made it possible, even if it had taken so very long, for the stubborn children of Abraham to come out of slavery into the land that they'd been promised. It were time now for passing the baton. I hope God knew what he were doing. I certainly didn't. Moses ended up in an unmarked grave. Nobody even remembered exactly where it was, except, of course, that it wasn't within that promised land. But he needed no flashy stone memorial to declare his success to later generations. In worldly terms, not even reaching the finishing line makes him look like an underachiever. But his legacy is not just the Torah, the 5 so-called books of Moses, the bedrock of the Hebrew Bible. It's also the living legacy of the countless millions who have tried to live by both Jewish and Christian faiths. Hundreds of years later, then, so much of what Moses was would be echoed by another dismal failure. Jesus. He expressly said that he hadn't come to change the instructions which Moses imparted, even if he did simplify those original commandments into 2 essential principles. First, love God above all with all your might. And second, love your neighbour as yourself, whoever that might be, as an equally precious child of God. Jesus also spoke out for God and was not universally well received. He too would offer release to the captive and oppressed. He too would feed the hungry and offer water to the thirsty. He too would be master of wind and wave before his shameful death. But he would bring God into his own world in an entirely new way. Not beyond some mysterious veil, but in person, in the flesh. And the only stone to mark this despised and pathetic failure's grave would not be there for long.